My name is Caroline Waterloo, and I've been here in Edinburgh since 2014.
So can I ask where you grew up?
I grew up on Aruba, which is an island in the Caribbean, and I lived there till I was 8, and then I moved to the Netherlands because my parents are Dutch. So I've lived there until I was, in my 30s. I've traveled a lot from 24 till about my mid-30s. I did a lot of travelling and working.
We're just out for a wee stroll today. Meeting up, get a wee wander, get some fresh air and a bit of coffee.
Are you guys from Edinburgh? You grew up here?
Just outside, more towards Livingston. The both of us. That's down Groggy, but grew up in Bathgate and stuff.
I've always had I noticed when I started doing my A-levels that all my interests were basically based around history, inadvertently. And I sing in a cathedral. Well, I used to until COVID, but and I got a great interest in sort of monastic history from that, and so all that came out. I realised there was a moment of epiphany, and I went, I'm going to do history.
So is there a specific area of history that you really focus on?
Sort of early Celtic monastic history, so sort of 8th, 7th century, 9th century, 10th century, that sort of era.
Well, I'm here in the middle of Edinburgh Central taking my dogs for a walk. In fact, they're trying to get in shot, but they need a good walk, and I'm out with my baby daughter Saoirse, who is 22 months old. So we're trying to get a bit of fresh air before the rain.
I worked at a factory, didn't like it, and then my friend said that there was an apprenticeship going to the gym, and so I unfortunately ghosted the factory. Didn't turn up the next day, and jumped into that. Here I am.
What kind of factory was it?
It was a healthcare disposal factory, a distribution factory. It wasn't very nice.
I lived in London for 6 years, and then I lived in Dublin for 10 years. And then when I was in Dublin, because I wasn't really working in my area that I like to work in, which is document conversion, I was working for the law library in Dublin. So then there was a job here advertised in Edinburgh at the National Library of Scotland for a digitisation program manager. I applied for the job, I was accepted, and so I resigned from a permanent job in Ireland at the law library to take up this position here.
Meaning of life? It's deep. It's a deep question. I feel like the meaning of life is probably more individual. You ask different people. Some people would say money. Some people would say kippa, maybe. Some people would say family. Some people would say music. Yeah.
What would you say?
Kippa.
Kipper.
Kippa.
What you say, kipper? Sleeping?
No, like the fish. Yeah.
you like cake? That's an interesting response. So
It's been in my family all my life. My dad was a kippa salesman. My granddad was a fisherman. So it's just been in the family all along. You know? It's kind of a big meaning to us.
I suppose it's not something I've given a great amount of thought, but I've always found that I'm much happier, I'm much more content with my place in the universe when I'm not so worried about my choices. So just pick something and go for it, which is basically what I've done most of my life.
I've spent the last best part of two decades in politics. I was a Member of Parliament at Westminster for 16 years, and I'm currently the SNP candidate in Edinburgh Central for the Scottish Parliament elections on the 6th of May. Before all of that, I was a journalist. I was based in Vienna for 10 years, and then came back to Scotland when devolution started, and now I'm, with a bit of luck, going to get into the Scottish Parliament when we get our independence.
Was that a colleague of mine started to basically misrepresent my job role to her line manager, and then I had a new line manager, head of a department. He came in, and she was just saying to everybody in power that actually the job I was doing a wider job than I was employed for, and that actually I should be doing this lower job. That was of course nonsense, but they believed her, and then they wanted to change my job and make her my line manager. So she basically defamed me in the workplace, lowered me, undermined my job, undermined the work as well. And for her then to become my line manager, I couldn't work under somebody who was basically just gaslighting the whole organization, and the organization went along with it, which was more shameful because they have very good policies and procedures, but they just ignore them. It's just a tick boxing exercise, and I don't know what their motivation was, because the person that was defaming me and basically gaslighting, she didn't have the right qualifications either to do the job.
Well, I do believe there's an innate sense of morality.
If you want. It's doing videos, to be honest. rather than.
You know how many followers she's got TikTok?
Yeah. So we're talking about the morality.
Yeah, so I do believe there's an innate sense of morality to a certain degree.
So do you think that's something that can reform with?
Yeah, I think at least the basics, not to kill someone or, sort of sense of fair play is kind of a given. I think, or at least, how would I know? I've never existed in a society other than this. So I've got
Morality. Wow, that's a deep question. I think probably a lot of it comes from your family, how you're brought up. I think a lot of it comes if you're from a faith community, or you have had some connection with the faith community, you will learn a lot about morality. Your education, it's something that I studied a bit of while I was at university. And if you're somebody who's interested in lifelong learning and wants to keep on reading, then you've got plenty of opportunities to pick up on subjects like that, and I do. So I think it's not something for one period of your life, but it's something that you can learn as you're going along.
That's one of the times you're probably most scared of life.
Scared in life. Bored. Probably at school. Secondary school. I kind of felt like a gazelle out in the African plain. There's a lot of kind of toxic vibes when you're in school in terms of like, how many pubes have you got? Oh, not many. Oh, well, that's trouble. That kind of thing. And you kind of feel pressured to bully people that you feel you can, just to try and establish yourself and that kind of which is horrible when you think back. Like it's not a healthy environment. And since leaving, I've got a good group of pals, which helps. But I mean, if you didn't, geez, I don't know what you'd be feeling after school in terms of your self-confidence and your worth and where you want to go.
I'd say being lost on the streets of Marrakesh at the age of 11 was pretty bad. That was actually, at night. And I wasn't lost for long, luckily, but it was enough to freak me out.
Ask what kind of journalist you were in Vienna, what you covered, and kind of just the breadth of the experience that you had over there.
So I was there just after I finished university at the beginning of the 90s until 1999. And so if you think back, that was just after the Iron Curtain came down in 1989. And so the East was just opening up, and Vienna was the furthest eastmost Western capital, if that makes sense. So you were right next to what was then Czechoslovakia and Hungary and the former Yugoslavia. And so part of what I was covering was the civil war in Yugoslavia and all of the developments essentially in Central Europe at that time. It was an exciting time to be there.
Have you ever had an epiphany?
Epiphany? I've smoked weed a lot. suppose I could maybe explain it like it's, you know, I have an epiphany every night about 7 p.m.
But she wasn't in the post yet, so when I raised that grievance, they continued to implement their idea and even made her redundant and put her through a redeployment process after the fact. So she got the job and then decided, well, how are we going to move her into the role? Well, we just make her post redundant and put her through the redeployment. Now, and that was the issue as well, because the redeployment process, they look at skills of people, and if they actually have the skills to take up the role, and the job description and the skills forms that she filled out, because I got a lot of information through subject access requests, it showed that she didn't have any digital skills, and that this person had to be a manager in the digital department, but she didn't hardly just basic knowledge of Microsoft Access or Excel, no digital skills to name off. She had nothing on paper that I saw that I thought, yeah, actually, she deserves that post and I'll be happy to work under her. No.
There were a myriad of stories. One of the things that there was a lot of interest in that part of the world at that time was the rise of the far right, and unfortunately perhaps one of the first of the populist right-wing leaders, a guy called Jörg Haider, was very successful at that time. And what he did is something that a lot of populist right-wing politicians have copied ever since. So I'm opposed to that kind of politics. I'm opposed to somebody that wants to pick on immigrants or refugees. I stand for a very different kind of politics, but it's important that we understand those kind of political leaders because they've been successful in other parts of Europe, and we certainly don't want that to happen in Scotland.
I like a lot of places for different reasons. I went to Ecuador a couple of summers ago for like a conservation thing. I'm absolutely fucking terrified of spiders. Like, honestly, it's the worst thing ever. But I found like it helped me so much there, and I'm sort of left with this memory of an amazing rainforest, and, really interesting local culture, which is a totally different to anything I've seen. But on the other hand, I find LA fascinating in another way. I actually hated LA, but now that I look back on it, I quite like it at the same time, for totally opposite reasons I liked it before.
I went to the employment tribunal. Even I was still employed, and I took them to the employment tribunal. But they were just not being honest about what happened. They just made up their own story, and unfortunately I was unrepresented. And the employment tribunal, because of it's the library and their reputation is more important than my reputation, and if it's the truth or not, that doesn't matter. It's to protect the library's reputation. And that's how I felt that the employment really looked at the case. They didn't take it seriously and objectively. They just went with the library story. And you can see it as well, the decision is online, but it is not the truth that's in the decision. A lot of evidence wasn't looked at and wasn't evaluated, and that evidence would show that actually the library wasn't telling the truth.
There's no place to go inside. How do you feel about the direction of the human race?
Ooh, another deep one. Going really deep. I get my goggles on. Kind of scary, what highlighted to me was that the US went on this huge big space expedition to Mars, costing billions of quid, but our government felt that it was a bit too pricey to give school kids lunches, and that kind of highlights it all, doesn't it? We're trying to reach up there, but everybody lost down here just gets ignored. So that's my opinion.
I've always said the nicest place I liked to live was Kew Gardens, because I worked there for the National Archives and it was very nice. But then I came to Edinburgh And I said, actually, Edinburgh is a very nice city. It's now my favorite place until the shit happened. But it's still a very nice city, and there's a lot of nice people in Edinburgh as well.
Well, I'm super excited about the prospects for Edinburgh with what would happen with independence, because we would go from being the capital of a devolved country, so it has some of the decision-making powers. We have a parliament, we've got a government, we can make some decisions, to being the capital of a sovereign state, a member of the European Union. So suddenly we would have embassies springing up, we would have all kinds of better flight connections, obviously after the pandemic, the prospects for trade. I think Edinburgh's got a great future after independence. Obviously, a great capital now, but it can be even better, and so can the rest of the country. So I'm really excited about the prospect of being part of that generation in the Scottish Parliament that can help make it happen. But it's only going to happen if people want it to happen. So we have to get the referendum, and when we get the referendum, people have to vote for it. So with a bit of luck, that's what's going to happen.
How do you feel about the direction of the country?
Bad. Bad. Not ideal. Yeah. Scotland individually, I've got hopes for, because personally I would like to see them go independent. I'm English, but moving up here has given me more perspective on how undemocratic it is for Scotland to get roped into stuff without really having a say. That annoys me. I don't really feel the government reflects everybody's views and opportunities. If you grow up well, you come from maybe a white middle class family, everything's hunky-dory for you. But everyone else out of that spectrum kind of gets left behind, and I think that's bullshit. So I would quite like to see Scotland get independent and move away from, England and the Empire and all that kind of nonsense.
Our connections with the rest of these islands are deep and they're broad, and I'm English by birth. It's not about where we come from, it's about where we're going. And just because we want to make decisions for ourselves closer to home doesn't mean that we're moving away. We're moving out of Westminster, we're not moving out of the island of Britain. And so it's just a change in the relationship that we'll have. I think the social union that we share between Scotland, England, Wales, but also Ireland, North and South, in many respects can actually get better as a result of us being responsible for our successes, and hopefully not many, but our failures too. That's one of the things about making yourself responsible, and I think it'll actually lead to us having a better relationship between the different nations on these islands.
So where are we now?
Well, we're still fighting with the library because the justice has not, been done. And for me, it hurt me so much. Like say, congenial job role. I've studied to be in this position, and then I'm just being cast aside because somebody else thinks she's entitled to my job because she wasn't performing in her previous role either. Now I've got evidence of this, so people can sue me, but then, I've got evidence to show that what I'm saying is true. And if anybody bothers to look at it, then they realize that, so.
Well, if you're watching, vote. Definitely vote. Vote. Don't take the piss. Don't piss in public places either. Which is a rule that I think should be abolished, by the way. Especially with all the toilets being shut.
I know, it's very hard.
No, it's ridiculous. Not just dudes, anyone. If you need to pee publicly, as long as you do it in like a quiet little area, like not here, that'd be a bit much.
You were an MP for 16 years. What was it you were most proud of that you've achieved?
There was one thing in particular that I was involved in that I thought really showed about a potential that we could have here, was that I helped organise peace and reconciliation talks between representatives from 3 countries, Armenia, Azerbaijan and Georgia in the South Caucasus. And they came all the way from their part of the world, all the way to Scotland to try and work out their differences. And that showed me that Scotland can be a place that people will want to come to, where they can help sort out their problems. We don't have the answers to everybody else's problems, but the good news is that most people know Scotland, and they like Scotland and the idea of coming here. That's obviously a big sell for our tourism, but I think Scotland could cut itself as a niche for being a centre for peace and reconciliation, a force for good in the world, where we might be a small country, but we can help do something that can change lives for people right across the world.
What I see happening in the library, it just reflects the Boris Johnson attitude, you can lie and you can break the rules and I'm untouchable, you know, because we are the elite, and if staff members are unhappy, it doesn't matter because we can't do anything wrong. So they are empowered to just gaslight everybody, and we're being gaslighted now as well about quite a few things, I think.
Well, thank you to anybody and everybody who's watching. If you're watching this before the 6th of May, please make sure that you vote on the 6th of May. I would hope you'd vote SNP with both votes, but if you're not, you can't win them all. Please make sure that you do vote, and with a bit of luck, the SNP will win in Edinburgh Central, with the viewers' support if they want that to happen. And if I'm elected, I'll work very hard for everybody, no matter how they voted.
I hope Scotland will not become sort of the same as what's happening in London. I think they're still more sober here, people, and more, with their feet on the ground. What I think of the future, I'm very worried. Not so much for me. I've had a good life. I've enjoyed my life, and I'm in my 50s. I don't ask for much in the future, if you know what I mean. But for young people, I'm quite scared, because young people also respond when you tell them that injustices are being done. They say, well, yeah, it happens everywhere, what can we do? And there's the people lack the spirit to say, no, we shouldn't accept it, not say, oh, well, they won't do anything anyway, so I'm not going to stand up. Which means that they just continue to do what they do. And we're just being quiet, let it done to us. And 10 years from now, we realize where we are and that we allowed that to happen. Because there's no fighting spirit anymore. People aren't thinking independently anymore. And it might have to do with the technology and, the computers, because there's no real chance of really discussing things if you're on Twitter. And you think you know everything because I've read this Twitter thing, but there's no depth anymore in reporting of news. So that's worries me, that people just take a sentence, a slogan, and say, yes, that's true, without looking any further and see, well, what do other people say, and, evaluate everything that's being told. Morality comes from, that's a very profound question. I think never do unto anybody what you wouldn't like to be done unto you, sort of thing.